In this video, I'll walk you through the first step of creating a scale score, and that is to determine if you need to recode any of your variables. And then I'll show you how to recode. I recommend you follow along in the Student Study Guide with IBM SPSS Workbook. Let's look at our research methods questionnaire as an example. For some variables, such as age or gender, one variable is sufficient to assess the construct of interest. However, with something such as attitudes towards research methods, more abstract constructs, it's oftentimes necessary to ask several questions in order to assess that overall construct. Here we have 4 questions. The idea here is that all 4 of these questions represent the overall attitudes towards research methods. And that's where you want to create what's called a scale score. Now, the first step in creating a scale score is to look carefully at each of the items to make sure that they're all coded in the same direction. What that means is that a higher score on each of these questions should represent the same level of the construct. For example, if you recall, the way we coded this measure was that strongly disagree equals 1. And strongly agree equaled 4. If I'm taking this survey and I answer this question, research methods is a good learning experience, and I say strongly agree, then my score on that item would be a 4. If I answered the next question, I'm afraid of research methods, I would say strongly disagree, and my score would be a 1. Now, you might notice that these 2 items are scored in opposite directions. For the first item, a higher score of a 4 indicates that I have a positive attitude toward research methods. But for the second question, a score of a 1 means that I have a positive attitude toward research methods. And so I need to recode this question so that a higher score actually means more positive attitudes. Let's look at question 3. I look forward to research methods. In this case, a higher score, if I said strongly agree or 4, that would mean a positive attitude. So I do not need to recode this item. Same with number 4. I love research methods. A higher score, meaning a 4, means that the person strongly agrees with this, and therefore I do not need to recode this item. To review, questions 1, 3, and 4, a higher score, meaning scores of 4, indicate a positive attitude toward research methods. Whereas for question 2, a higher score of a 4 would indicate less positive or unfavorable views of research methods because the person would be indicating that they're very afraid. So consequently, we need to recode this variable. Basically, what this means is that in SPSS, we're going to recode so that a 1 actually will mean a 4, a 2 will mean a 3 will get recoded as a 2, and a 4 will get recoded as a 1. Because ultimately, we're going to compute the scale score, meaning we're going to add up these numbers to create a total score that represents attitudes toward research methods. So we want all of our numbers to make sense. Now, some people choose to enter it in this way before they enter it into SPSS, so write it out manually, or to calculate the total score ahead of time. That's a perfectly fine way to do things. I prefer not to because I think there's just more room for error, and I prefer to have a computer do any calculations. Recoding in SPSS is relatively straightforward. You can follow along in the workbook on pages 40 to 41. I'm going to go to Transform, Recode into different variables. This is just a habit I've gotten into to make sure that I have a clear record of all of my recodes rather than recoding into the same variable. And then this new box will open, and I'm going to select the variable that I want to recode, the afraid variable, and send it over to this box. And then I'm going to give it a new name. And my strategy is to just call any recodes the same variable name with an R at the end. But unless your professor tells you differently, you can name your variables anything that you like as long as it doesn't begin with a number, there's no symbols, and there's no spaces. Then click Change. And then I'm going to click on Old and New Values. And here I'm going to tell SPSS 1 equals a 4, a 2 equals a 3, click Add, a 3 equals a 2, and a 4 equals a 1. Now notice that I have to do all of these. I can't just say a 1 equals a 4 because that doesn't necessarily mean that a 4 equals a 1. Whenever I have students who make mistakes with recoding, this is typically where they make the mistake, is they don't have every old value equaling a new value. Then I click Continue and OK. I get some output that I'm just going to hide down here. And then my new variable shows up at the end of my data set. If I wanted to move it by selecting it and then moving it over, if I wanted to organize my data set in that way. But I usually just leave all my new variables at the end of my data set. A couple notes. These numbers are specific to the data set that I'm using here. If afraid was coded on a 5-point scale or a 7-point scale, these numbers would obviously be different. If you have multiple variables to recode, you can actually do them all at the same time. That doesn't apply here because we're only recoding the afraid variable. But if we wanted to actually recode all the other variables so that a higher score meant less favorable attitudes, we could recode these 3 variables, and we'd have to give them each a unique new name. But then our old and new variables, we wouldn't have to change anything, and we could just do all those variables at once. You can also take a single variable or a total score and recode to transform it into a different variable. For example, I might want to look at age instead of as a ratio variable. Maybe I would like to look at it as younger adults versus middle-aged adults. And in that case, I could use the Recode command, and I'm going to click Reset here. I could convert age into age split. I'm going to call it a different name. And then my old and new variables, I could say anyone, the youngest or the lowest value through, say, 25. I could code as 1 being my young group, and then anyone who is 26 to the oldest, I'd code as 2 being my middle-aged group. Now, recoding is not just about creating a scale score. The Recode command has many useful functions. For additional review on recoding, particularly about recoding to create a scale score, go to the review video, or skip ahead if you feel like you're ready to the reliability video. This will show you how to compute reliability before you create a scale score.